Notre Dame has produced 7 Heisman Trophy winners, over 100 consensus All-Americans, and dozens of first-round draft picks. But which players delivered the most legendary single-game performances? Today, Luke Smith and I each reveal our top 5 games by Notre Dame football players from the past 30 years. Coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. And I'm thrilled to have you here with me on Friday, July 18th. So happy Friday to you, and thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. This is your reminder to please subscribe on YouTube or follow on your preferred podcast platform. That way you never miss an episode, and you're definitely going to want to stay locked in because we have got some really exciting things coming up as we get closer to the start of the season, including something special at the start of next week to commemorate the 500th episode of this show. Stay tuned for that. But today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. I am so excited for this one. It is time for another edition of Top 5 Friday, and today I'm bringing in the big guns. I'm going to be joined by my good friend from college, a man with a long history of strong Notre Dame takes. That is Luke Smith, to break down the top 5 best individual performances by a Notre Dame football player in the last 30 years. From Kyren Williams running wild against Clemson to Golden Tate doing Golden Tate things to Xavier Watts dominating Caleb Williams in USC. There are all kinds of great performances that we got to talk about, so let's get to it. All right, Luke, before we get into our respective lists, I want to start with how you approach this. Were you focused on stats, stakes of the matchup, or just the eye test? Like, what were the biggest factors for you when deciding which performances made the cut?
Probably all three, or a combination of all three, honestly. And I think that you'll see that as I go into this. Some of these were in really big moments. Others were on teams that, frankly, weren't very good, or against teams that weren't very good. But I think another aspect of this is like, there's something about when I left the game thinking that's the best game I've ever seen that player play, or that's the best game I've ever seen one of any Notre Dame player ever play. So I think they're all considered or taken into consideration. But I do think that, like, as you'll see with some of the ones with stakes, you make some exceptions just based on how big the stage was.
Also, I'm burying the lead here. We did not plan on matching. If you're watching along on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened.
As soon as you jumped on, I was like, oh my God. It's not the exact same shirt, but it's pretty damn close. For me, I looked at the stats. I was actually going through the Notre Dame record book today, and there's some names who pop up a whole hell of a lot, like Golden Tate, like Jeff Samar, if you're looking at the receiving stuff, Brady Quinn, obviously, for passing yards and things like that. But I was a little bit surprised, I guess, by how few record-setting performances there have been in like the last 10 years, because you think back, like Notre Dame has been on this really good stretch here. They just made it to the national championship, a playoff appearance in 2018 and 2020, but there weren't quite as many single-game performances that really stood out. We should also clarify, too, we're looking at the last 30 years that we've been alive, that we have been able to watch. So if you're going to get in the comments and tell me that, like, Tom Clemens had a game in 1966. I'm sure
he did.
I'm sure it was awesome. I'm sure it was absolutely incredible. But for today, we wanted to focus on the ones that we actually got to witness, maybe not in person or at least on the television. But that's kind of how I set this up. So why don't you lead us off with the first one that really stands out to you?
So as I was going through this, one of the first ones that came to mind was Benjamin Morrison versus Clemson in 2022. And not that long ago, but for those of you who don't remember, he had 2 interceptions, including a 96-yarder for a touchdown of DJ Uiagalelei that I think maybe gets forgotten a little bit just because the Jack Collinsworth call was so bad on TV. I'm saying that a little bit facetiously. But he had a tremendous game with the 2 picks. In addition to that, he had a pass breakup and 7 tackles, and it really kind of felt like an arrival for him that, oh, shoot, this freshman is something legit. And he later on that season had 3 picks against Boston College. But this was a huge, huge game. Notre Dame was really struggling. They had Drew Pine at quarterback, and they went in and just beat the brakes off of number 4 and undefeated Clemson in early November.
They won that game I believe it was
35-14.
Yeah, 35-14, and they didn't have a whole lot of offense in that game, so they needed Benjamin Morrison to step up and come through. But the irony of Benjamin Morrison having such a stellar game was the week prior against Syracuse, that might have been the worst game of his career. He was a true freshman, and Syracuse was picking on him early. I think he had 2 pass interference penalties in that game. So for him to bounce back from quite literally the worst game of his career with an all-time great performance is just really something special.
Yeah, and it's not really anything that anybody saw coming. I mean, people had been impressed with his play. Obviously, playing against Ohio State as a true freshman in his first game, and he played a lot early on, but that was not a very good Notre Dame team, and that was a sign of, okay, they might have a star here. They might have something, and it really came at a huge moment when they needed it, because I think they had like 85 passing yards in that game. So they definitely needed the defensive touchdown in addition to some of the other weird ways they scored in that game.
They just ran duo over and over and over again, and Clemson just could not figure out a way to stop it. But going into that game, nobody was talking about Benjamin Morrison as a freshman All-American. Then he rattles off that performance, and then a couple weeks later, like you said, he has the 3 interceptions against Boston College, and then has another one in the bowl game against South Carolina. So quite the freshman season from Benjamin Morrison. I'm going to pick another performance from a Notre Dame-Clemson game, and that is Kyren Williams against Clemson the first time around in 2020. So his stat sheet isn't crazy. 140 rushing yards on 23 carries, but he did have 3 touchdowns in that game, including the game winner in the third overtime. But the play that everyone remembers is the 65-yard rushing touchdown on the second play from scrimmage. That really set the tone for the game because Notre Dame had just been punched in the mouth so many times in these types of matchups. For Williams to come out and score on a play like that immediately just let you know right away that Notre Dame was ready to play in that one. But also, looking beyond just the stats, Clemson's defense was allowing less than 100 yards per game on the ground leading up to that point, so he's doing it against a really talented defense. And something that is not going to show up in the stat sheet is his performance as a pass blocker. I believe he went 19 of 19, not an official stat, but in 19 situations where he had to pass block, he came through every single time, including a critical block on the post route to Avery Davis that set up the game-tying touchdown. So just an unbelievable performance from Kyren Williams in a breakout game and a breakout season when Notre Dame needed it most.
Yeah, I mean, no notes from me on that one. A super memorable game. And like you said, really just affecting it in all facets, whether it be rushing the ball or blocking. So definitely a deserving performance to be on this list.
So we got a couple recent ones. What's next up for you?
So we're sticking with some recency bias here, but this one is one that I honestly feel bad that I almost forgot until I looked back at my text and I had said, I think that's the best game I've ever seen a Notre Dame defensive player play. And that would be Xavier Watts against USC, and more specifically, Kyren Williams in 2023. He forced 3 turnovers, had 6 tackles, a pass breakup. 2 of those 3 turnovers were interceptions. He also had a forced fumble and a fumble recovery and a touchdown. And, oh, yeah, all of that was against the eventual number 1 overall pick, Kyren Williams, an undefeated USC, who had just tormented the Irish the year before. And, I mean, just looking back kind of at the coverage of that game, you have Sam Hartman doing an interview. He sees Xavier Watts walk in, and he goes, hey, that guy's pretty good at football. He is. And to be honest, his last 2 times against USC, he had 17 tackles, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, 2 touchdowns, and almost 200 all-purpose yards worth of recovery returns or return yards, I guess I'll call it. So, yeah, that game, I left that thinking I've never seen anybody play that well. And then the next year against USC, wasn't quite on that level, but might have had a player of even greater significance given the stakes. So 2023, Xavier Watts versus USC.
That's another game that kind of mirrors the Benjamin Morrison game, even though Xavier Watts wasn't a true freshman. He had started the whole year, but he was just a good player, right? At the time, like we weren't talking about Xavier Watts the way we talk about him now. That was his true breakout game. He ends up winning the Zikowski Award largely because of that performance and who it was up against. And it was just so satisfying in a season that just felt so disappointing considering the way that Notre Dame lost at the end of that game to Ohio State, and then they laid that dud against Louisville, and vibes were not high going into that game against USC. And then Xavier Watts basically single-handedly lifts up that whole season, and it is the defining moment of that year. So what an awesome game. And it's crazy to think about what that led to later on, because now he goes down as one of, if not the most accomplished safety in the history of Notre Dame football.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you're right. That was 100% the launching point.
All right, I'm going to go a few years back with this one. Golden Tate versus Washington in 2009. Look at this stat sheet. He had 9 receptions for 244 receiving yards, which goes down as the second most all-time in a single game by any Notre Dame player. He had 1 touchdown. It should have been 2 because he took 1 catch all the way down. He dove in at the 1-yard line. They ruled him out of bounds to 1. They scored on the next play. So he should have had 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 carry for 31 yards in that game, and that was a very back-and-forth game. Washington wasn't a great team, but Notre Dame really had to win that game. There was a lot of pressure on them to have a good season in 2009. They already had 1 loss, and they were on the brink of this one. They could not stop Washington and a Steve Sarkisian-led offense, so they really needed Golden Tate to come through. And then he had that famous play in overtime where he caught the drag route. I guess he tried to leap his way into the end zone from like the 10-yard line. Does a helicopter in the air. I thought he was seriously hurt when he came down, but he was all right. But I just remember all the twists and turns in that game, screaming at the television, like, give the ball to Golden Tate. They did, and that's why they won that game.
Yeah, and frankly, like, that's pretty much his whole 2009 season, which is absurd. And while we're on that same vein, one of the games on my list is Golden Tate 2009 versus Stanford, which is the only performance on this list for me that came in a loss. But he had 10 catches for 201 yards and 3 touchdowns, plus a carry for 15 yards. And I just remember watching this game and it feeling like every time he touched the ball, there was a chance he could score. And he actually gave them a chance at the end of this nonsense game where everybody kind of knows Charlie Weiss is getting fired. He's a lame duck. Notre Dame's probably going to decline a bowl bid. And he's still, Jimmy Clausen's just throwing bombs to him, and he's outrunning the Stanford defense and giving them a chance. And believe it or not, this is the last time, and actually I think you would believe this. I don't know why you think not. This is the last time a Notre Dame receiver went for over 200 yards in a game.
That's pretty wild. What's even more wild is think about what Notre Dame's wide receivers did last year and how long it took one Notre Dame receiver to get to 200 yards on the season. Luke, do you know the game in which that finally happened?
Well, I only do because you said this, and I believe it was Bo Collins against Stanford on October 12th.
On October 12th. It took a full month and a half of games for a Notre Dame wide receiver to get over 200 yards for the season last year. Meanwhile, back in 2009, it was happening semi-frequently.
They had 3 receivers have like 200-yard games because Michael Floyd had one of his own.
Yeah, so, I mean, what Golden Tate was doing that season, that game was so weird because that's when Notre Dame just could not stop Toby Gerhart. He was just running through, around, over the Notre Dame defense, which was sort of a staple of the Charlie Weiss era. They couldn't stop anything, man. And as I was doing this exercise today, I was going back through and watching some of these old highlights of these games because it's like, okay, you could look at the stats and you could remember, wow, they must have played really well in that game. But when you actually watch the highlights and you see and remember just how dominant they were, it stands out even more. So as I'm going back and watching some of these Golden Tate games, like this game in particular was so weird because to the point that you're making earlier, like everyone knew Charlie Weiss was out the door, but then you have Golden Tate putting on an all-time performance. Like he obviously really cared about this one, and then it was all for naught because they lost to a Stanford team. That was fine. They were 8-4, but that's just kind of the story of the Charlie Weiss era.
Yeah, it really was. Couldn't stop a nosebleed, but man, could they put up some yards and some points.
Luke Smith and I still have a lot more great performances to break down, including one from Todd Zikowski that I'm certainly never going to forget. But first, a word from Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. It's so much easier to stay on top of your finances when your accounts and spending are in one place. And that's exactly what you get with Monarch Money. Not only does it help you plan your long-term goals, but I have found it very helpful in managing my day-to-day responsibilities. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. I'm actually going to pick another Notre Dame-Stanford game from the Charlie Weis era. And this is one that I don't think a lot of people remember, but they should. So I'm going to take Jeff Samardzij's game against Stanford in 2005. To set the stage here, Notre Dame had to win this game to make a BCS Bowl, which was very significant at the time. They had not done it in a few years. And considering the way that the Bob Davie era ended and the Tyrone Willingham era ended, like they really needed to make a BCS Bowl and hopefully get a win. They didn't ultimately do that. But last game of the regular season, they're going back and forth with the Stanford Cardinal. They're not even that good. But Samardzija finished with 8 receptions for 191 receiving yards, which goes down as the 9th most all-time, and had 2 touchdowns. He had an 80-yard touchdown in the first play of the game. But on the last drive, Notre Dame has a chance to go up 9 with just over 2 minutes left. DJ Fitzpatrick misses the field goal, so Notre Dame gives the ball back to Stanford, up 6. They immediately rattle off like an 80-yard play. That sets up a touchdown for them. They make the extra point. They go up by 1. So Notre Dame has the ball, under 2 minutes to go. They need to drive down the field and score. They cannot rely on DJ Fitzpatrick. He's already missed 2 field goals in that game. And Jeff Samardzija had 2 huge catches. I think it accounted for just over 40 yards on that drive. Ultimately, Darius Walker scores the touchdown and converts the 2-point conversion. But Notre Dame really needed that win, and they do not get that win unless Jeff Samardzija plays like he did. And I think it's just one of the more underrated performances that we have seen in the past couple decades.
100%. And I think a lot of Samardzij's career, honestly, like, I don't know if it's just because he played baseball or whatever, but almost gets like lost to history. I think at one point, if not still, he had the record for most touchdowns in a season by a Notre Dame receiver. I mean, think about that Pitt game in 2005 where he just came out guns a-blazing, kind of out of nowhere himself. A really, I don't want to say underappreciated career because he's like kind of a cult hero in Notre Dame football. But I feel like just because it's been so long, almost 20 years now, people have started to forget just how good he was at wide receiver.
So if you open up the Notre Dame record book, right, and you can do it in a PDF, I did Control F, find. His name shows up 77 times.
Wow.
Exactly. He was that good. And I think the fact that Michael Floyd broke pretty much all of his records like immediately after, he didn't really have some time where he was at the top. And it also just goes to show you how kind of weird things have turned out with Notre Dame when at one point they were having all these great receivers come through the program, and now they haven't had one truly great one in a really long time. But I think that's part of it. Also, he's just a guy who is really low-key. Like, ever since he retired from baseball, you have not seen him, heard from him. He doesn't go to Notre Dame games. He doesn't do media or anything like that. So I think that all kind of plays a part into why he's not forgotten. He's just maybe not appreciated as much as he probably should be.
Yeah, no, I think those are all good points, but he definitely put on a show in that game and really those last 2 years that he was at Notre Dame.
And Maurice Stovall, too. The fact that they had Samardzija and Stovall and then McKnight the following year. Like, if McKnight doesn't get hurt in 2005, just think about how unbelievable that receiving trio could have been.
Yeah, and they've still been waiting to replicate that for 20 years now. But we'll see. Maybe they'll finally get something similar this year.
All right, what do you got next?
So this is, I don't know why we're so hung up on Notre Dame Stanford games, but I've got Julius Jones 2003 versus Stanford. This was a game that I was at as a 6-year-old, and I just remember really being. This was before the farm got redone, so it looked like a high school stadium. There was a track going around it, and I remember, like, as a 6-year-old, having only gone to games in Notre Dame, just being stunned at how amateur the Stanford football stadium looked, and their performance was amateur in this one. The score was 57-7, but Julius Jones had 23 carries for 218 yards and a touchdown. He averaged 9.5 yards a carry. Ryan Grant stole 3 touchdowns from him. He had 3 touchdowns of his own on 84 yards. But I remember it was one of those games where it just felt like if it was not 57-7, Julius Jones could have had 400 yards that game. And I think for a long time in my childish head, until probably I looked at it when I was like 15, I thought he had like 300 yards rushing. So wasn't even a career high for him, but I just remember being in awe at that one. And it was an incredible performance by Julius Jones.
Okay, I've got a couple follow-ups here. Number one, what the hell were you doing in Palo Alto for that game? Stanford finished 4-7 that year. Notre Dame finished 5-6. Why on earth did you make that trip to that game?
My parents had like a surprise party for one of their law school friends who went to Stanford. So that they like all their friends went out there for that game. But yeah, I guess the follow-up question would be, why did Notre Dame go 5-6 with two NFL running backs, high caliber NFL running backs on that roster, and Brady Quinn at quarterback?
That team stunk. That team was so bad. And they literally only had Julius Jones because the first time I ever
Ryan Grant.
I know, who ended up having a really nice NFL career with the Packers. I think Grant had a better NFL career than Julius Jones, which is pretty crazy just how things worked out there. But the first Notre Dame game I ever went to was in 2003, Notre Dame Navy. Julius Jones had a couple touchdowns in that one, and Notre Dame needed DJ Fitzpatrick. Another shout out to him in this game. He actually came through in this situation, kicked the game-winning field goal, and I was ecstatic after the game that I got to witness Notre Dame win on a game-winning field goal the first time I've ever been inside Notre Dame Stadium. I remember my dad being like kind of annoyed, borderline pissed off after the game, and I could not comprehend why he was upset. And now looking back, yeah, I think that when you need a game-winning field goal to beat Navy, like that's just a low point for the Notre Dame football program, at least at the time.
Yeah, well, there was a period of time where I guess really the low point was when they lost to Navy 3 times and how many ever years. But yeah, it used to be a little bit too competitive.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about that 2009 season. They had Jimmy Clausen, who was awesome that year, Golden Tate in his prime, Michael Floyd, Kyle Rudolph for some games. Kyle Rudolph was like constantly hurt throughout his career. That team went 6-6. We've talked about this many times. That is unbelievable. And they lost to Navy at home that season.
They sure did. It was it's up there. I think actually until the Cincinnati game a couple of years ago, I thought that was the worst first half I had ever seen in Notre Dame Stadium when they played Navy in 2009. And then because they were shut out at halftime. And then the Cincinnati one, I think, one-upped it. But maybe different stakes, different caliber of team too.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Michael Floyd had like a brutal fumble, or maybe it hit him right in the hands, and then Navy picked it off. God, those were dark, dark times. So it's sort of a fun way to basically appreciate what we have now and just the success that Notre Dame football has been having lately, because a lot of these great performances that we've been talking about, they were during a really dark time where the games are, I mean, the Notre Dame Stanford 2009 game could not have been more meaningless.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your earlier point on like why we don't have as many on this list from the last 10 years is because the last 10 years when they've been really good, they've been playing more complementary football, both the offense and defense contributing. There haven't been as many just standout stalwart performances, whereas in the earlier days, those are pretty erratic, inconsistent teams where you might be putting up a ton of points and yards, but your defense can't stop a nosebleed. So maybe that's why, or maybe it's just the nostalgia that we're looking back on some of these early 2000s teams, but that's at least what I'm thinking as just we kind of go through this list.
One other follow-up to Julius Jones' game. Why did you pick that one and not the one when he had 262 against Pitt?
Because I don't really remember that one, to be honest.
I don't really either. Like, I don't know what. I mean, granted, I was 7.
Yeah, but I remember being at that one at the Stanford game. So, and I was probably, I don't even know, but like that Pitt one, for whatever reason, just it doesn't ring a bell. So I wasn't going to pick something that I don't really remember.
One I certainly remember very fondly happened just a few months ago. That was Jane Greathouse versus Penn State in the Orange Bowl. And look, there's a couple of factors at play here. One, recency bias. Two, the stakes of this matchup. Because if you look at his stat sheet, it wasn't super impressive. He had 7 receptions for 105 yards and a touchdown. But it felt like every single reception that he had was massive. Obviously, he had the 54-yard game-tying touchdown when he made 2 Penn State defenders fall. But he also had the third down conversion to set up the game-winning field goal when Riley Leonard rolled left. He found Jaden Greathouse in that little soft spot in the zone, but then he fought for some extra yards. Like, if he doesn't make that play, Mitch Jeter might not make that field goal. We talk about that game completely differently. Maybe Notre Dame doesn't even end up winning that game. He also had a huge, huge catch on 3rd and 9. It was like the very end of the third quarter. Notre Dame really needed a first down. Riley Leonard just kind of threw it up. Jaden Greathouse went up and made a play, and it felt so significant in that moment. One, because it kept the drive alive, but two, Notre Dame's wide receivers just did not make that many plays like that last year. They had Bo Collins do it against Texas A&M in the season opener. So for him to come up with that catch, that drive ultimately ended up with Jeremiah Love's famous 2-yard touchdown run. So when you consider the plays that he made at the most important points of the game and the just magnitude of the matchup overall, I think you got to put that one in there.
Yeah, and also consider this. Penn State's receivers didn't catch a single pass in that game. So it was quite the juxtaposition, finally having a receiver go for over 100 yards. I thought he played great as well, but I think if you ask Marcus Freeman, he would probably just remember that he couldn't find somebody to block on Jeremiah Love's 2-yard touchdown run. But that's besides the point. He was fantastic in this game.
Yeah, he was just watching like a fan like the rest of us in that moment. It's hard to blame him.
Yeah. Well, I've got something similar in this vein, and it's actually a guy from the Sugar Bowl, and that's Junior Tuihalamaka against Georgia. And there's probably going to be some people hearing this that are going to give me a lot of grief for this one, but he had 4 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, and a huge fumble recovery off that RJ Oben strip sack. But I think what stood out to me the most about this was he abused Georgia's offensive line all afternoon. And he made the list because this is a guy who's a third stringer until week 5 of the season. And he was so dominant that I remember listening to podcasts and all these national guys going into the lead up of the Orange Bowl, just talking about how much of a beast 44 is, like not even realizing that this guy is not a starter for Notre Dame, but he was just outstanding on that day in New Orleans. And that's why he's on this list for me, because also the stakes were huge and Notre Dame needed it with already its depth really questioned and challenged.
That was a truly all-time performance and one of the most unlikely ones. Certainly didn't expect to see Junior Tuihalamaka on this list, but then when I saw you put it down and now after hearing your explanation why, it's really hard to argue because Notre Dame really needed someone to step up. I mean, they didn't have Botello, they didn't have Traore, and they still had other good players on the defensive line, but they needed someone to come in and make a play. They obviously got the forced fumble from RJ Oben, but then Junior Tuihalamaka is there to scoop it up. Like, it was a huge performance and one that they really needed at the time. Going up against a Georgia offensive line that was certainly vulnerable, but look, it's one thing to be vulnerable. You have to take advantage of it, and that's exactly what 44 did in this game.
He sure did, and it'll be interesting to see how he builds off that this year with all some guys back, but they really needed it that day, and he gave it to him.
All right, I got one more before we get to some honorable mentions here. And there is a bit of personal bias in this one. I'll admit it. I was at this game, maybe like the 3rd Notre Dame game I ever went to in my life. It's Tom Zikowski versus Tennessee in 2005. So he has a 78-yard punt return for a touchdown. Notre Dame takes a 21-3 lead on this play. Then Tennessee actually came back, and I actually kind of forgot about that until I saw the highlights. But Tennessee mounts a comeback with Eric Ainge as quarterback, and then Tom Zikowski comes through again, has a 33-yard interception return for a touchdown that effectively put the game away in the 4th quarter against Philip Fulmer's Volunteers. And he also had another punt return in this game where he brought it back to within Tennessee's 20. He almost scored again, so that would have been 3 touchdowns for a defensive player. He finished with 118 punt return yards, several tackles as well. And I just remember watching that game thinking he completely dominated the game as a defensive player, and that's just something that you didn't really see a whole lot of, and considering Notre Dame's defense was so bad during the Weiss era, it was great to see one defensive player step up. And even though one of the plays was on special teams, it was just so fun watching him just annihilate dudes because he would lay the wood, but also when he had the ball in his hands, he was just so difficult to bring down. So really fun player from my childhood, and I think that was one of, if not the best game of his career.
Yeah, and this could just be, me misremembering something from 20 years ago when I was 8 years old, but I have this sort of recollection of him basically getting a curtain call at the end of that game, like the football equivalent of it, where he's got the whole stadium chanting his name. I don't remember really seeing that another time, and that was, 20 years ago. So yeah, that one sticks out for sure. Incredible performance, and he basically got a curtain call.
He did, and he deserved it. That game it didn't come down to the wire. Notre Dame ended up winning by 3 touchdowns, but it was certainly in jeopardy in the 4th quarter, but then he once again came through with that interception return for a touchdown. He was just all over the field. The only other time that I can remember a curtain call by a Notre Dame football player. It was another defensive player, and it was Manti Te'o against Michigan.
Yep. And you know what? Honestly, I don't know how we don't have any players or any of his performances from 2012 on this list. That's a really strong honorable mention one.
Yeah, it's on my honorable mentions because he had 2 picks against Michigan in 2012 and I think 8 tackles.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good pick. I think his Oklahoma or Michigan State game could probably be on there as well. But yeah, do we want to get into the honorable mentions?
Yeah, go ahead, rattle yours off.
So I've got Ian Book 2020 versus Clemson the first time, and because he was a madman that night. And then I've got Michael Floyd 2009 versus Nevada. Like I mentioned earlier, he had 3 touchdowns and over 200 yards receiving. And then I've got 2 kind of off the radar ones that I just remember leaving that game saying, wow, that guy completely changed the game. And it was games that Notre Dame really needed in different ways. Julian Okwara, 2019 versus Virginia. He had 3 sacks. Really, the whole defensive line was dominant in that second half. And then Chase Claypool in 2019 versus Virginia Tech, just making big catch after big catch on that last drive. I think he ended up with 118 yards receiving for the game. Otherwise, that season really would have gone off the rails without that last drive. So those are 2 honorable mention ones as well.
Chase Claypool also had 4 touchdowns against Navy. I remember that today when I was looking through the record book, and I was like, that's right. That was when Navy was ranked.
Undefeated, I think, right?
Trendy upset pick of that game. Whenever people are like picking Navy to upset Notre Dame, like they did in 2019, and they did this past year, just know that Notre Dame is not just going to win that game. They're going to absolutely dominate them and run them off the field.
Yeah, it's not going to be competitive.
And yet, Notre Dame plays Navy at night this season. All right, for my honorable mentions, we've already talked about this a little bit. I felt like we had to put Julius Jones versus Pitt in 2003, although I'm with you. I was 7 years old. I do not remember a ton from that game. I mean, it was a pretty irrelevant season. But I put in Maurice Stovall versus BYU in 2005. Yeah. Brady Quinn set the single-game passing record, most touchdowns in a game with 6 in that matchup. But Stovall's stat line, 14 receptions, 207 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And BYU was like a decent team at the time. So the fact that he put up those kind of numbers as the number 2 wide receiver, it's just hard to fathom. And lastly, the Mo Crum game, 2007, UCLA. Notre Dame was 0-5. And UCLA had a walk-on quarterback playing? What was his name?
Yeah. He played in the NFL, though. Did he not?
I thought he was a USFL guy. He might still be in the USFL. We need to get research on it. All right, well, you do that. I'll go through his stat line. He had 8 tackles, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, including 1 that was returned 34 yards for a touchdown. Notre Dame won that game in the Rose Bowl against UCLA for their first win of the season. And to see a linebacker literally carry a team to a victory is something, one, I hope I never see again. I hope Notre Dame is never in that position where they need a linebacker to do that. But I mean, we talked a little bit about Manti Te'o in 2012 and what he did against Michigan. Like, he obviously came through, but Maurice Crum actually had to score points in that game as well. And it was a disgusting game. I still remember it pretty vividly, though. But we got to give some love to Mo Crum, who I believe is in the coaching ranks these days.
Yeah, he was at Ole Miss. I'm not sure where he is now. The guy's name was McLeod Bethel Thompson, by the way. And yeah, he was a USFL and CFL guy. So not NFL. I was being far too generous there.
I think he was like a scout team quarterback that they basically they had to activate for this game. But those are all the ones that I have. Are there any ones that just missed the cut for you beyond these honorable mentions that sort of stand out?
Yeah, it's strange not to have anybody from 2018 on this list. I think you could make a case for Miles Boykin, either Stanford or Virginia Tech. I think he was phenomenal in both those games. There's probably some Dexter Williams performances in there. And then honestly, could we say the first half of Jack Cohn against Oklahoma State? I mean, he ended up with 509 yards passing in that game, which is outrageous.
Yeah. He threw the ball 68 times.
Yeah, I mean, they could not run it. That's why. But yeah, that was actually a tough day being at that one. I will say, I look back on that day, and that was one of those ones where it's like, why am I at this game? But anyways, don't want to end it on a somber note.
Yeah, I mean, why am I at this game? There's no greater example than 2003 Notre Dame Stanford. I had no idea you went to that game, and honestly, I don't know if I'm certainly not embarrassed, but I am a little bit concerned because
that wasn't my choice. That wasn't my choice.
I know. I can't even imagine. Was anyone there? Do you remember? Was there any other people in the crowd?
That's kind of what I'm saying. I remember being blown away by, one, the fact that there was a track around the stadium, and two, the fact that re-entry was allowed because it was basically like a high school game.
Re-entry at Stanford is awesome because when I was there in 2021, it was Brian Kelly's last game.
There were 500 people there?
We didn't know it at the time. There were more Notre Dame fans. Definitely felt like a high school game, but we went in and then we realized that Alabama was about to lose to Auburn when Bryce Young was there. So then we left the game, went out to a tailgate, watched the last drive on a TV, and then went back into the stadium. Look, at least they kind of embrace it. If they are going to have a joke of a stadium and that just no one cares about the team, or at least they didn't care at the time, at least make it fan friendly. They certainly did.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, that is all we have for this Top 5 Friday with the best individual performances. Luke, we are a couple weeks away from the start of fall camp. Can you believe it?
I can't. But yeah, I mean, we're less than 50 days out from kickoff now, so it's getting there. It's sneaking up on us. It's good stuff.
Yep, and as we get closer, I'm sure we're going to have you on a lot more, and then once the season starts, every week, brother. So thanks again for doing this, and I'll talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, leave a like, or if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts, be sure to follow the show and drop a 5-star rating and review. I'm going to be back on Monday with a very special guest for the 500th episode of this show, so you're definitely going to want to tune in for that. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. I will see you on Monday.